Hello everyone, and welcome to the second webinar for Phishing Countermeasures, a short course presented by IT Masters on behalf of Charles Sturt University. Thanks for joining us. My name is Guy and I'll MC this webinar, and your mentor is Bianca Worth. Before we begin, as usual, just a few words on Zoom's webinar functions. We encourage the asking of questions and the use of chat during the webinar, and there are two ways to do so that we use. We ask that you direct all course content related questions to the Q&A section and that you send all administration type questions to the support team, or commonly known as Diane, in chat. You can chat with panelists only, or if it's something you don't want to share, or if it's something that you feel everyone could gain from, you can chat to all panelists and attendees. And you can make that choice by toggling through the drop-down box once you've opened the chat log. As I said last week, there are usually some very experienced industry-based attendees who will be most helpful with any questions or queries you may have, or for just oh, hey, what's this thing that Bianca's talking about, for those of you who don't quite have the experience that they do. We'll have Q&A sessions periodically throughout the webinar, or I'll just interrupt if a question is particularly relevant. As I said, Diane is again here to moderate and respond in Zoom chat. She's also responsible for the learn.itmasters.edu.au website, which is where you find all the other materials needed for this course, whether it's lab instructions, discussion forums, or the weekly quizzes that are released after these webinars. The CSU representative we promised and planned to have deliver a little more info on CSU and the relevant masters programs at the end of this webinar has had to pull out on short notice, sadly. So I'll muddle through their presentation as best I can after Bianca's content. I'll try to answer any questions you might have about CSU, but please don't expect encyclopedic knowledge. And we can always keep your questions and answer them next week. Or you can send them to the people that I'll tell you about during the presentation that will be at the end of Bianca's content. Quick note about emails yesterday. I'm terribly sorry I sent the wrong one, for those of you that are confused. Yes, all webinars for this series will be on Tuesday at 7 o'clock Eastern time. And if any emails tell you otherwise, you should disbelieve them. But that's enough of me for now. Please welcome Bianca.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming back for the second week. It's great to have you all here. So let's kick off because we've got a lot of content to get through tonight. Someone mentioned in the forums, asked if I was actually going to get through all the slides. I think there's about 60-something slides. And my answer to that is I'll give it a red hot go. So just to recap the important parts of last week, the IT team here decided it was the perfect time to implement patching on my laptop, so we lost connection for a little bit. The lights in the room kept switching off, and Guy tried to change the topic to plastic blow-up dolls. And finally, we offended every Nigerian and New Zealander on the call. So we hope not to do any of those things tonight, but I hope you had a little bit.
I demand a right of reply. I was not talking about blow-up dolls. I was talking about wacky waving, flailing things out the front of car yards.
Yes, and I
go to my grave claiming as much.
I do admit it was probably my interpretation. So
yes,
take that one on the chin.
Anyone who went there, it's their own fault. Anyway, thank you.
No worries. Thanks, Guy. Okay, so the real content for tonight. So on the agenda tonight, we've got the basics of mail servers, and that would just be a bit of a recap for those of you who already work in this space or work on email infrastructure. We're going to cover a little bit about, like really briefly, spam versus phishing emails, which was mentioned in one of the Q&As last week. We've got a little bit on the Spam Act 2003, Commonwealth legislation in Australia, and there's probably equivalents in other countries as well. Then we're going to go through a practical analysis of a phishing email. So we're going to pretend essentially that we are one of the incident response people in a threat detection team. And we'll do it at a moderately high level, but just to give you lots of different tools that you could potentially do if you're investigating phishing emails, essentially. Some tools to view the content safely and whatnot. And then we'll really briefly just touch on SPF and DKIM as well. So let's kick into it. So here's our poster from last week that we introduced, and this week is these areas of the poster that we're going to cover off. So the basics of email servers. Essentially, we've got, if I get my little pointer out here, we've essentially got the sender's environment here and the recipient's environment here, and then the internet over here. As you can see, we've got the little promised bunny that I said that I would put into the slide this week. And essentially, the sender creates an email. The sender is also known as a mail user agent, so that's the technical term. But you can just call them a sender. The emails are uploaded to your email server via specific ports. And for those of you who don't know what ports are, they're essentially sort of communication channels, I guess is the most basic way to explain them in computing infrastructure. So it's a way for a message to get somewhere else. And then it lands on the sender's email server. So that's officially called a mail transfer agent, an MTA. They add local headers. So that's an important bit to remember when we get further on. We're going to analyze some email headers. And they look up the mail record on a DNS server to say, where is the recipient's domain? I need to send it to this person at, mydomain.com.au. Tell me where my domain .com.au sits. Then it runs out to the internet, and the email hops through multiple servers, or can hop through multiple servers. And each server adds more headers. I'll explain more about headers soon. The message then arrives in the recipient's environment at the recipient's email server. Remember, that's called an MTA, and adds local headers. Then we've got the email client, so your Outlook, for example, or Gmail, or whatever it might be, checks for new messages, and it does that through these ports here, so port 110 or 995. Typically, you can customize those ports, so they're not always fixed that way. So 995 is the secure method, for example, for POP3, and then SMTP is the common port there is 465 for SSL. And then the email's received, kapow. So the recipient reads it, decides it's a phishing email, and reports it hopefully to the threat detection team. This might be an easier way for some people to remember I personally like this version of it better. This is the bunny collective, or how carrots get from bunny A to bunny B in the den. So that was just for a little bit of fun. You can actually read that later, but essentially says the same thing, except we've got bunny rabbits all the way through sending their carrots, and add little nibbles all along the way, and it ends up in the post box down in Betty Bunny's den. So, and then carrot received, yum. Okay, pop quiz. So I've asked, I hope you took notice of that sort of 2-minute spiel on mail servers, because I've asked Guy to put up a quick sort of poll to say, what is the common secure port for POP3? So your choices are 465, 110, 25, or 995. So let's just wait for those results to come in a little bit.
%60 voted so far. And we got a bit of love for 995. No love for 25. And someone put in the chat, they informed me that my very technical term, wacky waving arm flailing person, was not accurate. It's air dancer. So there you go.
If we ever need to go out and buy that piece of merchandise for an education campaign, I know what to go look for now. That's fabulous. Thank you.
Next question is, would it work?
Yeah, that's right. Education message up the side, waving something about in the air.
Yeah, might as well just fly a plane and blow out the messages. All right, we'll end that poll and we'll launch the results.
Okay, fantastic. So pretty much, quite a lot of people got that right. It was 995. So let's just I'll quickly show you that again. So down here, it was this one here, POP3 port 995 for SSL. Good job, everybody. And just probably a good side note there is maybe those type of questions are going to be in the exam at the end of this course. Okay. We'll talk a little bit more about the exam in week 4. But if you do have any early questions, feel free to post those. Okay, spam versus phishing. So essentially we've got spam versus phishing. So overall, you can kind of categorize spam as the overall category, and phishing as a subcategory. It's all unsolicited. It can be manual or automated. For example, it can more often than not be scripted or botnet delivered, for example. And in Australia, it's governed by legislation such as the Spam Act 2003, which we'll get to next. But on the spam side of things, it's annoying that you get all this spam, but it has a non-malicious intent is the definition there. So for example, product and service marketing newsletters that you never signed up for, things like that. Someone sold off your marketing details. Now they just send you loads and loads of emails or SMSs or whatever it might be, which you constantly have to move off to the spam folder or junk folder, or get blocked at your mail server. And then on the phishing side of things, obviously we've got malicious intent, and as I said, it's kind of a subcategory of spam. Okay, so the Spam Act of 2003, there are, over on this side here, I've mentioned that there's penalties for breaking this, up to $220,000 for the first time that you do it, and up to $1.1 million for repeat offences. The issue, I guess, with having these, and we kind of touched on this last week, is that essentially, you know, people with a malicious intent, people from overseas, whatever it might be, they don't care. They're covering their tracks. So, you know, the number of times they actually get caught and penalized or, you know, fined for these sorts of things or thrown in jail or whatever it might be, that can vary quite a lot. But essentially the Spam Act of 2003, it is there to safeguard in this respect, and it prohibits the sending of unsolicited commercial electronic messages. So that includes email, SMS, MMS, and instant messaging, but doesn't cover phone, online ads, or fax messages. So there are some gaps there. For example, whether anyone actually uses fax messages anymore, I don't know. I have been told that there are certain departments in the government, and there's various companies. I know my dad asked me if he could have a fax machine, and I told him no, he couldn't. So it governs the commercial electronic messages that offer, advertise, and promote the supply of goods, services, land, business, or investment opportunities. That advertises or promotes a supplier of goods, services, land, or a provider of business or investment opportunities, or helps a person, this is the key bit for phishing, helps a person dishonestly obtain property, commercial advantage, or other gain from another person. So that's where elements such as a protection of your personally identifiable information, your PII data, comes into effect. So if companies, and you are a company out there and you want to comply with the Spam Act, you must essentially comply with three key elements. The first is consent. It must be express, i.e. I have actually signed up, ticked a box, and for example, there's questions around if it was pre-ticked when you got to the form, does that mean express consent? And then, or inferred from your dealings with them. So you've dealt with them for, you know, a number of years, they have your contact details in their customer database, and they decide to start sending out a newsletter. And then they must provide an unsubscribe facility. So on the bottom, it must be a functional and legitimate unsubscribe facility. I've seen this done so badly with even some really big companies. For example, just from not from a legal perspective, but just from a usability perspective, people shouldn't have to sign in to unsubscribe from a company newsletter. And then identity. So it must identify the sender and have their contact details as well. So for example, that's another strong requirement in the US law that's around. So if you go and use, you know, mail marketing tools like, there's a monkey one, I forget what it's called, but they always make you fill in the specific contact details section, you know, phone number, all that sort of thing, because they've got specific requirements around that as well. And also prohibits address harvesting software. But again, when it actually gets down to the crunch, you know, the people that are actually sending out phishing emails don't care about these sorts of things. There are exemptions. So before you start jumping up and down and saying certain people have sent it to me and they've not complied with these requirements, government bodies don't have to comply with that. Charities, religious or non-government organizations, or registered political parties. So they have a little bit more free will or leniency in sending out email messages that are, or digital messages, I should say, that are unsolicited. Okay, so the overall, here we're going to sort of jump in. Maybe we should just stop for a sec. Is there any questions that you think you need me to take right now, Guy?
People are asking whether anyone's actually been fined.
Yes.
Sean has said that MailChimp maybe has been fined.
MailChimp. So MailChimp were definitely the company I was thinking for. Was the monkey place. So obviously they've tightened up their controls after being fined. But yes, definitely. I read a case study and I'll find it, and this will be one of the things that I'll post as my follow-up. I did a post for the follow-up today on last week's question Q&A where I didn't know things or I had to send you links or whatever it was. I'll do the same thing this week. Yeah, so I'll find the case study and post a couple of those up for you because there are a couple of them, and it's managed by ACMA in Australia. And if you actually go to their website, they have got some case studies that you can actually work through and review around how people got fined and what they did wrong.
Okay. Ujith has asked, sorry, there's just a couple more.
Sure.
Is this applicable only to Australian originated emails, the Spam Act in Australia?
No.
Okay. And then Craig's asked, it used to happen for him that he ran a business and would send out mass emails, but someone would say, get me off your list. But due to email forwarding, they weren't actually on the list. What's the best course of action with that? Is there anything you can do?
Depends. So, for example, did they forward it from, say, a friend of theirs forwarded it to them, or there was an auto forwarding rule set up in the email? I'm not quite sure. I guess it depends on. But the recourse for you going back to them is if it was, I guess, even if it was auto forwarded or people are forwarding it on to them, they'd have to go back to the people who actually forwarded it to them. They're the people passing on the message. They're not actually on your list, so technically you're not doing anything wrong.
Yeah, and Craig's confirmed that it is an auto forward rule.
Yeah. Yep. So yeah, you'd have to go back to those people to get that auto forward rule. Why they'd set that up, I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, and just a lot of talk about Monty Python, spam, and disgusting luncheon meats. Well, actually, that's a value judgment that I can't stand by. I actually sometimes like spam. Never mind.
Okay, we learn more about you every week, Guy.
Turkey spam, especially.
Okay, I didn't even know there was turkey spam.
Oh yeah, get onto it.
Okay, that's a cuisine recommendation from Guy. Nice.
Cuisine's a bit much.
We're slightly sarcastic. No response. Okay. All right. Sorry.
Moving on.
Okay, moving on. Let's get on with the course. Okay, so here's a basic version of an incident management response process for a phishing issue or concern that came up. So step one, you undertake email analysis and do some intelligence gathering, and we'll talk more. That is the bit that we go into more detail about through the rest of this these set of slides. Then you might, for example, obtain a file copy and report it to email filtering and antivirus vendors as part of your blocking process. You might undertake up malware analysis. So for example, although I would have loved to cover malware analysis here, I'm not an expert in it, and I do have a couple of slides that I can post up for people if they're interested in. It essentially points them off to other resources. But essentially, you'd need to undertake that process when you've identified in your environment that it actually has, malware has actually been installed or replicated somewhere, and you need to actually figure out, okay, what are the indicators of compromise? So those things that tell you that, the malware exists on a computer. Then you might block in your environment. So for example, you might go to your mail server and block the sender or IP addresses or whatever it is, the intelligence that you gather that enables you to block that effectively. And sometimes that can be difficult because, the guys, or I'm not saying guys, the people that are sending this stuff out can change their method fairly quickly and turn it around. And even though you block one set, the next day there might be a different set with a slight different variable in it. Then step number 5 is identify and remediate compromised machines. Obviously, you've done that malware analysis. You figured out which ones are infected, and you either have to do something like rebuild them or remove the malware in some way. just a note on that as well. On the phishingcountermeasures.com website, I put up a number of resources around, there's a great website that if you are hit by ransomware, some ransomware variants have tools that can help you remove those. So that's a great resource for you to be able to go to and determine, okay, is there something out there that can fix this without having to pay a ransom or without having to, restore everything from backups, for example. Step number 6, you might undertake a stakeholder notifications, letting them know that an incident occurred, what happened, how many machines were affected, how far they got in your environment, and what you're doing to remediate or stop that from happening in the future. And step number 7 would be report your phishing to vendors and ISPs. All those are all sort of steps. You might do those synchronously, so you might not necessarily wait for one to stop before you start another one, because you kind of want to stop things, especially if it's malware that's replicating around environment, fairly quickly. So you undertake multiple steps at once. So reporting phishing to vendors and ISPs. So for example, if you've got a anti-malware, anti-emails, so ISPs who do the blocking for you, it just depends on who your vendors are that you work with to stop spam and phishing getting into your environment. Okay, so here's an example or a bit of a practical analysis of a phishing email. This wasn't one that I got. This one was actually detected as a phishing scam. So as you can see here, this message was identified as a phishing scam. For this particular email address, I'm on Office 365. So that was actually served up by the anti-spam in Office 365. And if we go and have a look at the headers, and we'll delve more into this soon, there's a line in particular here that says BCL 9 and PCL, I think it's 8. So BCL is the bulk complaint level, and you can take a look at there at the different numbers. 9, it's a bulk sender with a high number of complaints being made against it. And phishing confidence level is an 8 because they've determined that it's likely to be phishing based on their algorithms. Plain text reason here for spam classification, so they blocked it based on the fact that it's they've gotten so many complaints, mainly as bulk email. So a practical analysis of phishing email that made it through, so didn't get caught in the junk folder. So this one here I got just after Christmas last year at 4:18 a.m. Sydney time, and it said ComSec Advisor Services. So ComSec, for those of you who aren't in Australia, is the Commonwealth Bank, Commonwealth Securities, and so they're a bank and financial institution here. And then says cash, title Great Holidays and a Happy New Year. And it went straight to my junk folder, but it seemed fishy to me, so I thought it was a good one to run this test through. And it's fairly simple, so it doesn't get too complex to do as an analysis in this session. So they've said, Merry Christmas and may you have a spectacular new year. Why, thank you. Your holiday card is here. And as you can see, it looks super fishy. The CommBank would never send out an email formatted like this. It'd never be on that type of URL. And they'd never say it, Great Holidays and Happy New Year. So here's my little bits and pieces saying, yeah, that's not right. But I was a little bit proud of them. They did have no spelling errors. So it's good to see that the phishing people are starting to take that feedback on board. Okay, so with our analysis of this email, the first step is identify the indicators of malicious intent. So this step up here, number 1, let's do the email analysis and intelligence gathering. So what I just want to touch on first is that there's multiple different email scenarios where an email can be legitimate or malicious and come from different sources or have different things done to it, for example. So the first scenario is you've received a legitimate email and it's non-malicious. It's just your normal everyday email. That's scenario number 1. There can also be the scenario where you have a legitimate email account and that email account has been compromised. So the email account is fine, but say the user account and password has been compromised by someone, and now they're using that valid email account to send out malicious emails. So that's one scenario that you might investigate. The third scenario is the sender's subdomain or linked subdomain is legitimate, but they have registered malicious subdomains. So a few years ago, I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago, there was a real rush on people registering subdomains, and there was configuration errors in quite, one of the domain registrars that was mentioned was GoDaddy, for example. So people would go create their domain and they'd leave some settings, or there was some configuration issue inside of the GoDaddy where people could register malicious subdomains and host malicious websites on those subdomains. So when you look at the email and who it's from, it looks like it's legitimate because it's coming from it's for example, my company, it's coming from phishing.iag.com.au instead of at iag.com.au. So it looks like it's from us, but really it's a malicious subdomain that's been registered and taken control of by someone else. And then the fourth scenario is an email with spoofed headers. So that's the one that we're going to sort of focus on here. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is a little bit of analysis to quickly determine if this email is a phishing email, and we do a destination page analysis. So there's some fantastic tools out there. Virus Total is a really great one. So I pumped the URL that they provided, the Dowso6000 or whatever it was, .com, into Virus Total, and immediately it came back and said, yep, these virus or malware tools have detected it as malicious. So that's your first indicator that it might be. And then it gives you a bit more information. If you click into the details, and it'll actually say, so people have reported these variants of the domain and the, the hosted folder underneath, or the file that it's pointing to. And then it gives you some details of the actual downloaded files that people have submitted as well. So, it's got variants of your gift card.doc, your e-gift card.doc, and so on and so forth. So you can see here, it's also got IP addresses. So all this data here allows you to then take that back to your environment and start blocking some of this content from getting through to more users or more employees in your environment, so that you limit the impact of the phishing attack. And then when I actually clicked in and had a look at the doc file as well, it came up and told me all the different variants, and a lot of the vendors have different names for the same malware, but it's come up and said essentially it's a Trojan, and it's been given a community score of -78. So you can be pretty sure that this one is malware. It's a malicious website that's either been breached or they've registered the domain themselves, and it's hosting a malicious document. Oops, sorry. Okay. So then I also went, and so you might want to do a little bit more validation depending. There's another site called Trend Micro. Is it safe? And you can pump in the URL there, and they've come back and said it's dangerous. It's a malware accomplice site. We've got one thing that I do want to say, so let's just double check that I got through all of them. So one thing I do want to say about when you paste in the URLs from emails, be really careful, because some of the URLs have personalized content. So for example, we've got this example on the screen here, and at the end you can see it's got me@myemail.com, pretending that's my email address. So if you copy and paste those into those public tools like Virus Total and places like that, anyone can see those, including spammers and scammers. So they actually trawl those online databases as well and pick up more email addresses that they can use to add to their pot. So you have to be really careful. So a tip that I got from one of our threat detection guys is sometimes it works to actually take the URL and change it to something, a dummy at the end, to see if you can analyze the URL without your custom details in there. But you do have to be a little bit careful about doing it that way. In the, let's see, I think in the readings from this week, there's a really good there's a really good case study of where this happened, and that was Olympic Destroyer. So there was a piece of malware that went out during the Olympics in Korea. It affected the Winter Olympics, that is, and it affected a number of ski resorts and places like that. And people were actually, the researchers, security researchers, first found out about that these environments are being breached because someone went and posted these URLs and details on one of these public websites. So security researchers are also monitoring these sites. So you really do have to be careful about what is copied and pasted up there. So if we have a look at this one here, I just want to show you an example that I found this afternoon in my junk folder. I get so much, phishing and spam. It's not funny. I noticed some people on the forum have been saying, I couldn't find a phishing email. I was like, wow, so lucky. I love your controls in your environment. And I'll just have to say that's my personal email. They get plenty too. So this one here, for example, if I hover over the link here, you can see it goes off to, a domain, a website in Singapore, apparently. And then it actually has the email details, which I've kind of, smooshed out there. And so it actually has my link there. So the question might be, why are they actually putting your email or sort of obfuscated data here into the emails? Well, it's a tracking mechanism. So essentially these malicious people are using it. They've got, just like anyone else, it's a business for them. They get money from it. So they essentially correlate this data. So say, for example, they might have, a few campaigns going out at once. One might be for Westpac, one might be for Combank, one might be for ANZ. They've got to have a way of tracking that the data that they're actually collecting is for the right site. So say, they've got one for Westpac and one for Combank. They want to make sure that when they send out an email that goes to someone for Westpac data credentials that they're trying to scam off them, that they know, oh, that's associated with the Westpac website. So when I go to sell that data or use it myself, it's for westpac.com.au that those credentials are valid for. So not silly about how they actually do some of this stuff. Some of the phishing stuff is really basic, and some of the stuff is really quite advanced in terms of how they've actually developed these processes. And then another quick tip as well is that some phishing emails have attachments that are not malicious, but you'll go and open up the attachment, for example. So you'll scan it through the things, and you might open up on a malware analysis, virtual machine, for example, and the attachment itself, say the PDF or Word document or whatever it is, isn't malicious, but it's got a link in there, and the link, the site it takes you to, is malicious, and it's, for example, designed to harvest your credentials as well. So just be careful of that. In that, just because the attachment didn't come back as malicious, the content inside, or the site that the site that it is trying to take you to is at the end. So we've done that one. Okay, so as well as getting some positive results from some of those tools, I also got false negative results as well. So for example, I went to Kaspersky's virus desk and I pasted in the link there, and they said, nope, we don't have any information about this, but they did provide the disclaimer that it may be unsafe to follow this link. Web Inspector, for example, again, no malicious activity or malware detected. Fish Tank is another one, and they said nothing known about this site. Checkfish, again, same sort of thing, and they've actually said clean, which is probably not the best thing to say, because that is potentially representing a false conclusion for the people that are actually doing the doing this at home, and may not be going and trying multiple tools. So the recommendation here obviously is go try multiple tools to make sure that you analyze the data correctly. And then again, Norton Safe Web, they've said they haven't tested it yet, which I like it better as a sort of feedback that gets back to you. Guy, do we want to stop for any questions here?
Sure. Aaron asked just about the example a couple slides back. Is the Xerox link at the bottom a spoofed URL as well? Has it got a different target in the hyperlink?
Oh, I'm not sure actually. I didn't even bother once I saw the, I went, oh, that's the type of URL that I want.
Okay.
Yes, answer to that is yes, it is.
Rightio.
It's the same URL.
Rightio. Omar's asked if the URL is fishy, according to different antivirus companies, why the URL still exists on the internet.
Right. It's, if you can imagine like how many hundreds of thousands. Okay, so first of all, let me put this in context. The speed at which phishing campaigns go up and come down can be as little as 24 hours or less, up to 48 hours, for example. Their goal is to try and get as many people to click or open within that period before they get found out. So, or tracked down. So, yeah, and not only that, it's really hard to keep ahead for antivirus vendors or whoever it might be, researchers. It's really hard to try and keep ahead of the, millions of websites that get created every day or hacked or, all that sort of thing. So they're kind of the two main reasons.
Okay, and a question on BCL score from James. Mm-hmm. Is there a global place to complain about spam or provide a specific scoring based on their users' complaints that you know of?
Not global per se, but I do have on the phishingcountermeasures.com website, I'm pretty sure I published a page that says here's all the different places that you can go report. So for example, if your antivirus vendor is Symantec, they've got a place where you can go complain about it. Microsoft will have a place, Kaspersky, Google, for example. Google can submit malicious sites. So if you see a malicious site out there, you go submit it via a form as well. So I've got all those links up on that site for you.
Great.
But there's no sort of like global entity that like takes it all and runs with it. There's a huge number of vendors working across this space and, sort of within their own boundaries.
Okay. And a few sort of linked questions, I think. How do we copy the URL to make sure that it doesn't execute the malware? Or is it worth trying the URL in a sandbox browser?
So to copy the URL, obviously you can hover and copy link, but it's always a good idea to have a sandbox browser, a virtual machine on a separate malware lab that's not connected to your corporate network, that's connected via a separate internet connection, for example, that literally you don't care as soon as you click that link if something happens to it. It bombs out. Well, you could just go back to the previous version of the virtual machine or rebuild the machine. So yeah, that's always a good idea. If you're going to do this as a process, set up your own sort of malware analysis lab.
Okay. And last one for now, Steve's asked, would having a filter like, for example, Barracuda help in preventing phishing emails reaching end users?
I'm not familiar with the Barracuda filter, so I couldn't say. I'm sorry.
Okay. Are there other filters out there?
Yeah, there's like tons of different, not only is there filtering at the ISP level, so depending on the size of your organization and what you've actually invested in, you could have, filtering at the ISP level if you've just got like a hosted domain, your smaller company, for example. And I think I mentioned last week, they've got a variety, depending on the ISP, they've got a variety of different tools, open source, paid ones, whatever. So you get what you pay for essentially. But then, if you're a larger organization, you might actually implement your own tools. So there's a huge number, like, there's Semantic Cloud and, Microsoft, they have their own solution, and Google implement their own solution as well. So yeah, there's a huge number of filtering tools and vendors out there.
Great. Okay, thanks.
No worries. Okay, so let's flick back through the ones we've already done. Okay, so now we'll do a little bit of intelligence gathering, pretending that we want to identify a bit more information about these emails that are coming through. So for example, there's a great website called Email Dossier. So the person who actually sent this email to me was this email address here. So I was trying to figure out, had he had his email account hacked or things like that. So it gives you, actually tries and does a check of that email address and validates it, and then it gives you the results. It actually says bad address, recipient rejected here, but I have to say that I did this a couple of months after I actually received that phishing email, and the test that I did, which I didn't capture the screenshot of, prior to that didn't say bad address. So between now and then, they've actually disabled that email account. And then it gives you the records. Remember we talked about MX records back in the mail server slide. It gives you the mail server records to say where these are coming from, and just a bit more details about this session that it established to verify and give you these results here. But essentially the key bits are, here's your validation results. There's a cool website called DNSlytics. You can get a paid subscription, or you can just use the free tools. For the free tools, I just use this here. And you can do a ranking. So that's another way to sort of validate, is this a reliable website that I should be going to? So for example, it's not ranked in the top million. It's never been ranked. It's not even ranked on page. Google PageRank, for example, has low or no reputation as well. So they're all indicators that this has probably been a website that's just been stood up for the purposes of phishing, for example, or it's a website that has been infected. So another good indicator of potential phishing emails is if they're using opendns.org as their DNS provider. So it's free and uncontrolled, so sort of it's out there and available for anyone to use. Not saying that everyone who uses that as their DNS provider, is phishing people, but just saying that it's more likely in that case. So they're in that tool DNSlytics as well. They've got hosting history, which is a paid tool, and this is the example that they give you on the site bbc.com, where if you go and look up the hosting history, you can see here for bbc.com right back down to 2013, whatever. It's got a good solid history of being seen and recognized. If you went to a website or plugged in a website into this tool and it had literally nothing here, that it, again, would be a good indicator that this is a website that has been set up for in a short period of time. Not saying it's malicious, but in a short period of time, which could be an indicator. Netcraft.com, I really like this website as well. Again, you can sort of plug it in, and then they'll start giving details like the IP address, the name servers, who the admin of the server is, and so on and so forth. Gives you a bit of a risk rating as well, and whether it's on any block lists or policy block lists. If they use SPF and DMARC and any web trackers. So the results down here will vary based on, for example, this was a Word document. But if it's a web page, it actually shows you all the scripts and everything it loads as well when it checks the website. Talus Intelligence is another good one as well. And immediately right here for reputation, they say poor web reputation and a poor weighted reputation. It is blacklisted, they've said, and it's classified as malware. It was first seen on this date, on the 28th of the 12th, and it's this is of 2017 that was, and this was its expiration date. So they're giving you a bit more detail to say, yep, this is definitely a malicious website. And another one which you need to register for is Risk IQ, and it's a good tool not just for phishing analysis, but for open source intelligence gathering generally. They'll provide you a fair bit of detail around a lot of different things. Some of it you have to pay for, some of it you can just get for free. So this is the bit where I just plugged in the domain and got this information for free. You do have to register, but this is a bit more of the information. You do have to register for the free version, so just be aware of that. Okay, so another really good tool is being able to view the contents of the website safely. So we talked, or one of the questions that was asked previously was about, would you do it in a sandbox if you're going to click links? Here's a way to do it if you don't have a sandbox. So urlscan.io is one website where they've come back and said, we can't scan this website. Oh, well, let's try a different one. And usually they give you a screenshot here of the website that you've gone to plug in. So then I went to instead to urlquery.net, and they were able to present what the actual end result would be if someone actually clicked on that link, and what they'd be presented with visually. So they've give you a little bit more information around blacklists that they've detected, for example, and any alerts that they've identified at that point in time. They give you a little bit more information about other domains and websites that are on the same infrastructure. And as I mentioned before, they can show you any scripts that execute and any of the transactions. So for this one, the HTTP transaction is you essentially send off to this URL, and that's the area. You get an OK result, and then it presents this page. So as you can see, it's trying to send you off to a doc site, and this is all the information that you can get without ever clicking on the link or having to execute it in a malware lab, for example. So I find that is a really handy tool to be able to see things safely. And then there were two. So what was really interesting about, and the reason I picked this one as a one to sort of show you as an example, is that 2 days later I received a very similar one, but they'd refined it somewhat. So this time they actually added my name in, so it became a spear phishing email. They hid the link, so without being able to hover on it. They still use the same sort of methodology. It came from a different email address. But they're saying sort of the same message, same sort of sender, added some customization in and obfuscated the link. So the similarities were the greeting, the approach. So if I went and I did go and analyze the second email as well, and it was an infected Trojan as well in a Word document, so similar sort of deal. And they had a similar message ID in the email header. So message IDs are part of the email headers, and I'll show you an example when we actually get to those. And usually they're generated by the sending email server as a way to track it. And all message IDs are supposed to be, they're not forced to, but they're supposed to be unique. So what was interesting about the first message is it actually had my domain in there as opposed to the actual sender's domain. So whether that was a tracking mechanism or not, don't know. It was just interesting that they then used my particular domain as the message ID. So whether they were using that as tracking would be interesting to know. If only I could get in their heads. Mail header analysis. Okay, so let's step into the technical bits of mail header analysis. So we've got a standard view of email headers, and someone posted up on the forum, thank you, saying if you want to have a look at email headers in Gmail, for example, here's some instructions. So this is a standard view in Outlook, for example. You sort of click on the email, select properties, and then you can see they call them internet headers here. They look pretty rubbish in here essentially, but there's better ways to view it. So there's a tool, for example, you can copy and paste the whole email header into the Microsoft Remote Connectivity Analyzer, and then it'll break it up for you and say, in hop 1, remember back in the email image that we had, in hop 1, it came from this IP address, and this was the receiving host. It was received at this mail server at this date and time. There was this much delay, none at that point, and what type it was. So it goes down and actually breaks up that email header for you and gives you more details. So these are all the little hops that the bunny went through to get to my email address or my mail client. And that you can see here, this one didn't have any BCL or PCL data in it. Now you can add this as a button as well. So there's an add-in. It's available as an add-in in Outlook, and you can click and view headers, and it gives you this pretty view of the message header, and it breaks it up even more for you. So it gives you a summary of the actual email header. It gives you the details here, so all the hops that it went through in a nice format. It gives you the spam report, and then it gives you the header analyzer, so the more details. It breaks it down into the DKIM signature, the SPF details, and so on and so forth. So that's an easier way to view it. Another free online toolbox, free online site that you can use to analyze email headers, for example, if you don't have Microsoft Outlook, is MX Toolbox. It breaks it up really nicely as well, and actually gives you a bit more detail around this one is actually on a blacklist. So again, that's another indicator that this was malicious email. And then below the table that you saw previously, you'll see all the different, it broken up into sections here as well. So take note a little bit of these bits here as fields essentially in the email header. And we're going to touch on in a second which ones can be forged and which ones can't. So some of this data can actually be forged, and that makes you a job of actually trying to detect and block a series or related series of phishing emails harder, and essentially understand what you can and can't trust in an email header. In the actual, so for example, back in here, if I clicked on that little blacklist button, then it actually gives you a bit more detail about which blacklist it was listed on, and then a little bit more information about all the different blacklists there and why it was identified. Okay, so what can be forged in an email header? Almost everything, essentially. The return path, so that's where delivery statuses notices are. That's separate from the from field. The date can be forged. The received can be partially forged. So all received fields, and I'll provide you a really close-up view of this in a second, that have been added before the message arrives at your inbound email server could be forged. Tips here are that you could check, for example, in the received parts of the header, that the time zone correlates to the actual time zone. And if it doesn't, that could indicate that that part of the received header has been forged. Sometimes they get a little bit lazy and don't actually try and figure out what the time or the time zone is. And then the content can definitely be forged in an email. The reply to can be forged. The message ID, as we saw, can be forged. The subject, the to, CC, BC, C, and from can all be forged. And arbitrary headers can be partially forged as well. So the ones added by your own server are trustworthy, obviously, but anything that were added before that are not. So what can't be forged, as I mentioned, the most recent received, the one that your mail server added, the originating mail server, and the subsequent timestamp. So let's have a quick close-up look at this. So this is the mail header in sort of a fairly raw format. So if we look at the results here, we've got the authentication results, and this part here is not forged. It's added as a verification when it reaches your mail server. And it said that the sender IP is, 209 dot blah, blah, blah. And that is the real IP address of this sender. So you can go look that up, for example, look what is my IP and find out what country they're sending from, for example. This part here in red has definitely been forged. Because they're trying to say that really the email was coming from this IP address, which is in the Seoul University Bundang Hospital, but it's actually coming from Google, as we validated here. So then what you can do to figure out which part of the message headers have been forged or not, you sort of match each server in each received. So when you read email headers, you start at the bottom because that's where it first got added. So this was the sender, then it hopped through to this mail server here, and then it hopped through to this mail server here, then this one, and then this was my mail server that it finally arrived at right at the top. So because you might want to look at this offline, but essentially if you follow the little arrows, you can kind of match that all these pieces of data are correct. They all match up, but this bit here doesn't. Essentially this does not match this. You can't match those together, so this bit is forged. And then it's got a bit more detail about, I went and looked up the domain. You can look up the MX records, for example, back on the MX Toolbox site. So it's got a lot of different tools on it. It's fantastic. A lot of different tools on it that you can actually use. And one of them is looking up the MX records if you want to do a little bit more investigation around that. Okay, some countermeasures. So just briefly, one of the countermeasures that we have in our big poster there is implementing domain keys identified mail. So the goal of this tool is to verify that the sender really owns the sending domain and has permission to send from it. So the way it helps is to stop malicious actors from stealing your email address to send an email purporting to be from you. So for example, they can't fake that it comes from you because the mail server will actually go back and check and say, nope, that's not actually, they're not allowed to send from our server or from their server. These are our validated servers. What it doesn't do, key thing here, is that it's not a spam filter. So spammers can also use DKIM. And it can't be forged, so someone cannot use your DKIM signature as their own. And another misconception is that it encrypts your data, and it doesn't. So this is the section of the DKIM headers. So I won't go into a huge lot of detail there, but there's sort of a brief interpretation of how they actually work. Not super relevant for the overall conversation that we're having here, but just FYI. So for the example that we were showing, this one had a pass, so the signature was verified, which makes me think that the Sunil at radcomsoftwareservices.com, his email account was compromised and was being used to send out these emails. So sender policy framework, SPF, the goal is to prevent malicious actors from using forged email addresses. So essentially, it doesn't stop messages that fail SPF from reaching the recipient's mailbox because all mail servers work differently. Some of them will stop it and some of them may not. For example, if it has a fail on the field, I think I've got an example here. So here we've got received SPF, it says none, but if it said fail here, some mail servers actually will still let the email through. So it kind of varies. It's quite hard. Sometimes there's no standards around this sort of stuff, or it's a little bit open to interpretation. And it does not stop spammers from using their own SPF. So just by having that SPF bit here where it says, if it said, I forget what the actual term is, but if it said valid, for example, then just because it says that doesn't mean it's not from a malicious actor, because they can set up their own SPF. Okay, really brief poll, Guy, if you'd like to help me out here. Who has already implemented SPF and or DKIM in their environment?
Poll launched now.
The way that I kind of put that, so while we're gathering the results here, so the way that I kind of put the SPF and the DKIM is, spammers can use it too, so don't rely on it, but it's really important to actually implement it in your environments because it adds that extra layer of protection for you. So if you don't have those couple of things implemented, DMARC is another one, and there's another variant of it as well that's from, was developed by a different vendor, which I can't sort of place right now. But those things are really important because it's like the security, if anyone's ever heard of it, it's the security onion where you add a whole bunch of different layers and they have to try and, peel off these different layers to try and get into your environment. And the harder you make the layers, the harder it is to get in.
Okay, so we've got 4 responses: SPF only, DKIM only, SPF and DKIM only, or neither of these, and neither of these, 50%. Both 24%, SPF only 21%, and DKIM only 4%.
Okay. All right. So something for homework. Go implement SPF, DKIM in your environment. And in some environments, it gets really complex. But in other environments, for example, say you're a smaller company and you use, say, Office 365, for example, you can just add that into your DNS server, the SPF parameters. It's on, it's enabled, and it literally take you like 5 minutes to do. In bigger environments, that 5 minutes sometimes turns into like 5 months because it's that much more complex. You've got a whole bunch of other domains that you need to add to the SPF record to accommodate, and so on and so forth. So it does get a little bit more complex in that respect.
Okay. And Amazon's just asked, I was just looking to confirm whether both of those are used in Gmail.
I have a feeling, and it was the one that I couldn't remember the name of, that that Gmail use a variant of one of the others. But let me take that down as a note, and I'll post that as confirmation back in my follow-up.
Or does anyone know, just in the Q&A or chat?
Yeah, sure. I have to say, I'm not a super sort of Gmail. I used to work for Microsoft, so if I bring up Microsoft examples, I do apologize if that's not your environment. Okay. Okay, so quick tool summary. So here's a quick summary. I've also put this in the lab, so you can literally just go in, check all the different tools and have a little play around with it in your environment. See what results you get back from, and see which ones actually give you a positive result, which one gives you false positives, and so on and so forth. So, it's got a little summary here of the purpose and what to check and each tool, which is linked. So readings and homework for this week, oh, that's back to front, but the lab this week is Lab 1, Intelligence Gathering. So I want you to find a phishing email. Could be the one that you used last week. It really doesn't matter for the first lab, and analyze it. So use those tools. And then Lab 2 is actually go into the email header itself and practice analyzing email headers to determine if they've been forged. So have a little, it really takes you a little bit to get your head around how email headers work, but once you're there, and there's so many different variables around them as well, they all sort of look a little bit different depending on, who your email service is with as well, and who the emails actually come from, the MTAs that they travel through as they go through the environment, and so forth. But once you start having a look at a few different ones, you can sort of start to compare things and figure out what's normal or what's not normal. But go back to that slide where I sort of gave the example of so sort of hopping through each of the received fields as a way to determine which part of it might be forged or not. So I think that's it for the main course tonight.
Okay. And we've had a couple people in chat talking about DMARC.
Yes. Yep. I just didn't have time to include it, but DMARC is another one. It's on the poster as one of the other methods that you can use as a countermeasure on your email server. Beauty.
All right. We'll go through the questions then. Quite a few interesting ones that were from earlier, but maybe not related to anything in particular. Phil's asked, could I ask if there are any Australian standards being written on cybersecurity that you're aware of, and what is needed as a minimum to mitigate basic matters and ensure there is an incident management process as well?
So I haven't heard of Australian-based standards specifically. One of the good sort of usable standards globally is the NIST standard, so NIST Cybersecurity Framework. And I was actually on their website today, and they have a tool on there. The framework sort of provides you all the different areas or categories of best practice that you need to look for from a broader cybersecurity perspective. But then and then it'll map it to other standards like COBIT and ISO 27001, for example, and say these are the matching areas in those standards. But what they did have on their website was a free assessment tool where it's got a number of different questions, so you could essentially analyze your environment and understand this is where we currently sit from the perspective of, best practice in cybersecurity. And, this is where we probably need to get to. So I'll post up a link to the actual tool. It starts with B, but I can't, the exact name slips my mind at this point in time.
No worries. Craig's asked a couple of questions. One of them about the domain of the dark web, .onion. Is there a reason it's .onion, and are there any others?
I believe there are others. .onion is a specific prefix that works, I believe, in just the Tor browser. But there's another prefix that works in another browser that you can access the dark web with as well. And it's discussed in that dark web notebook that I mentioned last week.
Thank you. And he's also asking, just with respect to those tools that, I guess, rate websites, what happens when you have a new and legitimate website and it has no historical data? You just visit the site a lot and to up the visit count?
What's that? Visit the site a lot using Let me have a look at this one. Okay, so what happens when you have a new legitimate and it has no historical data? You can visit you can visit the site a lot, and that would potentially raise your reputation. So the algorithm for reputation, for example, from the Google search engine, I'm not exactly sure of. But it does take into account age of it, or it used to at least take into account the age of the domain. For example, so after that, anything at one point, they change it all the time, but at one point it was anything under, 3 months old, they, sort of rated as low reputation generally. But again, that's sort of, they don't publish the algorithm, and people who work in search engine optimization, for example, kind of have to groom and streamline and adapt to their regular changes around that sort of stuff. So it is possible that a brand new website could look like it has a poor reputation, but the goal is to you could use those other tools as well to analyze whether it actually has malicious content.
Okay, Lucas asked just about that poster that you put at the start of your slides again this week. Is there a high quality image of that poster that we can use and maybe chuck on the Moodle page?
Yes, yep. There's a PDF version and it'll print out as either A4 or A3 if you like. So we can post that up there, and it could potentially, it's fairly high quality, so it could potentially scale to even bigger than that if you've got a printer that prints in bigger format.
Okay, so I'll put that up through the week. Sweet. When you're I think it was asked when you were talking about the header analysis, Omar's asked what if they are using a VPN? Does that change things?
What if they're using a VPN? I don't believe it changes, because what it's doing, it's hitting the mail client. So it could change the mail client IP address, yes. And if you're also sitting in a corporate environment as well, obviously it's going to come from the corporate IP address, and it's usually behind a firewall, and it's natted and all that sort of stuff. So but the mail server IP address is always the mail server IP address. It doesn't change. So it wouldn't be affected by a VPN. That's the bit that they'd spoof if they wanted to hide that.
Okay. And of course, there's questions flooding in now. We'll go with Paul's comment, I think. Australian Signals Directorate has the ISM, or Information Security Manual, that is designed to be used by government departments and their subcontracting organisations. That might be something to do with Phil's question earlier. So that's interesting.
And I noticed Rob there said it's the Baldridge Cybersecurity Excellence Builder. That's the NIST framework that I was talking about. Thank you, Rob. So if you go to the NIST website, I think it's nist.gov, and search for Baldridge or even Cybersecurity Framework, it's got a link there to it.
Ryan's asked, are email services that are made to be deleted immediately after use in danger of spam and phishing as well, or has it already been affected?
If you're talking about, you might have to clarify this. Are you talking about anonymization email services or public open email services? For example, where you can go create a public open email address and, it's used once and then you kind of throw it away. In that case, yes, potentially. For example, if you go to use those sorts of tools for open source intelligence gathering, the people like Google, for example, have cottoned on, and Facebook sometimes they cotton on to you using those services and they block it as a method of providing the alternate email address to sign up for. So, yeah, definitely.
Okay, and Will's asked, do you have any good resources to start with for the SPF and DKIM implementation?
I can't remember if I put some in I think I have some in the readings, but I'll double check that. And if not,
and we can always just start something in the forum. I'm sure plenty of
yeah,
people have good ideas out there. So yeah, that's the beauty of the forums, gang, and the chat as well. I think if you do have any questions or want some advice, feel free to just post something in there, and Bianca will be looking at it, as well as hundreds, if not thousands, of people as well. So chuck all your questions in there as well if we don't get to them tonight. I might ask you to just have a quick look through if there's anything important that you think we should get to. We should, but I'll try and get Jason from CSU's presentation out of the way so we can let people go early.
Yep, sure, go for it.
All right, so now I'll just try and figure out how to use Zoom, having just been the person that talks at it all the time. And I'll take over the screen now.
Okay, go for it.
I really should be better at this sort of stuff. There we go. So you should see a picture of not me.
Oh, I see a picture of not you.
Okay, well, this is a picture of Jason Howarth. He's Sub-Dean, Transforming Online Learning, Charles Sturt University. Many of you may remember him from previous presentations he's made. And I'll just try and, I've got this silly box in the way. Anyway, that's okay. He was coming to talk about Charles Sturt University. As I said last week, IT Masters partner with Charles Sturt University to deliver their online computer master's programs, or computer-focused master's programs. And he just wanted to have a quick sort of presentation about who Charles Sturt University is and why you should perhaps choose Charles Sturt University, or some of the advantages to going and studying at Charles Sturt. So as you can see, there's plenty of campuses at Charles Sturt throughout New South Wales and Queensland, and Canberra as well. They've got Bathurst, Wagga, Canberra, just off the top of my head. And they're all lovely, I'm sure, having never been to any of them. A lot of IT Masters folk are going up to the Wagga campus this weekend, actually, so that should be nice for them. We often go for graduations and those sorts of things, so any of you that are studying, you might meet us one day. But one of the beauties of CSU is their position as a market leader in online education. You can see the statistics there. They really do, as quite often in rural campuses, it's very important for them to be able to offer those online services. And it's a trend as well across the industry, I suppose, if we can call it an industry. But CSU, market leader in online education, as you might expect from short courses like this. Also very big on IT. Very popular, as you can see, sort of, and that is growing as far as I'm aware. In the last few years, Charles Sturt has actually consolidated its position as the most popular choice or destination for students interested in studying IT, or at least in postgrad and domestic. So yeah, there's it's a well-trod path and it's respected and it's viable, and I'm sure he would have much more wonderful ways to describe it, and I'm sorry if I'm not doing it justice, but I hope you get the idea. So yeah, just a few words on the master's program itself. As you can see in this qualification hierarchy, there's the four stages of it. Of course, we're talking predominantly about the masters, IT masters. That is where we focus. Charles Sturt University also offer a Doctor of Information Technology or a doctorate. I actually just did a short course on the DIT, so there's plenty of information on that if you go searching on the free short course section there. But the interesting thing is if you see the graduate certificate and graduate diploma, the graduate certificate is sort of part of a, I'll go slip forward a couple of slides, is actually nested. So essentially you've got an exit point. If you were to enroll in a master's course through CSU, should you complete the required subjects and the number of subjects that are required, you can see here that if you do 4 subjects and then decide, well, actually it's not for you, or circumstances have changed and you need to maybe take a rest or pull out altogether, you can actually exit with a graduate certificate. So you don't, if you're sort of vacillating as to whether or not you'll be able to make that kind of commitment, you can say, you can be reassured, hopefully, in the knowledge that you can, if you need to, pull out and still have something tangible as a result at the end of your study. So I'll just go through Master of Cybersecurity itself. It's a relatively new Masters or reworked Masters, and you've got the 8 core subjects, and these are compulsory subjects, and then you've got 4 electives on the right, you can see there. Many of these actually have short courses attached to them, or have short courses that sort of give you a taste of what they are like. So you can go and have a look at those. But yeah, they're all great. Working cyber warfare and terrorism. I just in November last year did a short course with Richard, and he's a terrifically interesting guy and full of interesting and controversial perspectives on the state of cyber warfare. They're great subjects. I haven't actually taken any of them, of course, being not a computer sort of guy, but I do know that the people that look after the subjects that I have dealt with have been very passionate and very interesting kind of guys and girls. So it's been great, and you can see that the electives are broad as well. So you've got ethics as I like the sound of that. I have no idea what I'm doing, to be honest, with this presentation. So if you have further questions and any specific questions, feel free to send them in, and we'll get the people that actually know what's going on to answer them. Here's an example of the LMS site that you use. Everybody loves LMS. This looks like some features of the hacking countermeasures subject, the full subject about which this short course is part of. Bianca, did you take this subject?
That one there, hacking countermeasures. Yes, I believe I've done that one.
Okay. How did you find it?
Yeah, really interesting.
It was good.
It was awesome. No, it was really good, because obviously I hadn't done anything like that before. I'm not a hacker. Like to think I would be one in another life, but I'm just not a good, programmer or anything like that. But yeah, no, really interesting. I wish I could have done the dark web one, actually. That looks super interesting. Just because I've got this thing about the dark web, if you can't tell.
Yeah. Okay, so hacking countermeasures is one of the subjects, and if you're enjoying this short course, there'd be more of it and similar to it in that subject. Oh, heavens. Looks like he's excited about the dark web too, Jason. So it looks like that's another subject in there.
Yeah, so the guy that's actually teaching that is super experienced. and he's done a huge amount of research, huge number of papers that have been published on the topic. Yeah, really, really interesting one. And I think it was actually mentioned on deep.web today, I think, in my news feed that it was there. So yeah, there's a real interest in that topic.
Great. And that would be what he's covering, it looks like. Okay, entry requirements. Bachelor's degree or higher, of course, and those with industry experience can come in through the graduate certificate pathway. So if you enroll in the subjects that are mandatory for the graduate certificate, you can then jump across to the masters and carry the credit across. Once you've got the 4 subjects completed in that, you'd only have 8 to do in your masters. If you do have more questions about eligibility, I'll send you some links, and there's actually some links in the course page with the people to contact about that. Neil, dear Neil, he's a lovely character. Time commitment, that's a very important consideration when choosing whether to study or not. We're trying to make it as easy as possible, or Charles Sturt University more accurately, trying to make it as easy as possible by having 6 intakes per year, and it's a trial program at the moment. So as you can see, not your usual semester or trimester program. You can, if you are interested in starting, immediately or at a particular time after a project finishes or something like that, you can see the intakes there. If you're just doing the minimum load, it's about 10 hours of study per week. But you can also apply for leaves of absences and scale up if you've got the time.
One of the things there, I was speaking with one of the other lasses here who also did the masters, and she said that one of the who is now a lecturer there did the course over 8 years. So he took a number of different leaves of absence for family reasons and a whole bunch of different stuff. And I do the same thing. I take a leave of absence whenever I need it. And yeah, I find it's the flexibility of it's really, really good.
Yeah, certainly my experience too, with maybe not need to. It's great. Credit. You can, I believe, get up to 6 subjects of the 12. Yeah, 6 subjects of the 12 can actually, you can receive credit for 6 subjects, I should say, for previous experience and previous postgraduate study. The experience is generally in the form of industry certification. So yeah, maybe not for the cybersecurity ones, but there'd be CCNA certifications or CompTIA certifications. They'd all be taken into account. Unfortunately, work experience does not qualify as experience, but if you are sort of wondering where you are placed with in terms of credit, and if that would be a consideration or a factor in your decision, yeah, do contact Neil, and he'll let you know where you stand. Cost, of course. You can see there the cost for each subject. And like all universities, I think, student services and amenities fee, and you can apply for help through the fee help program if you qualify.
Hey, we've got a question here, Guy. Can I butt in?
Please do.
And Paul's saying, how close are the standard subjects to the short course versions? Now, I think that there's a good benefit there in that if you do correct me if I'm wrong, but if you do the live short course version, you get partial credit.
Not quite. That is actually something that we should talk about in the credit, though. Given I'm the short course guy, I should know that. I should have thought to say that. Once you have done 3 short courses, and by done I mean completed the exam with a pass mark and earned your certificates of achievement, in many cases that will qualify you for 1 subject's credit. So if you've got, I guess, 4 credits for industry certification and 1 credit from a previous postgrad study, you would get 1 extra up up to that maximum of 6 subjects credit through the short course program. In answer to, I think it was Paul's question, how similar are the courses to the subjects? It depends on the course. Some are sort of primers to get you ready to go. Some are actually master classes that go further. Yeah, often it's completely up to the presenter or the mentor. This one, for example, covers, I suppose, one particular aspect that would be covered in the full subject. There's an AWS short course coming up, and that's going to focus on the security side of things as opposed to just getting people ready for the general subject. It's just going to focus on one aspect. So yeah, they by no means replace the subjects in terms of knowledge that you will gain, but they're certainly, if you feel confident that you have the knowledge you need and can complete the short course well, and can demonstrate that you have the required knowledge for the credit, then you may well be successful in the application.
Mm-hmm. Hey, there's another question from Andrew as well, and he was talking about the sessions. So he said, if those subjects are offered for each session, can we do 6 sessions per year?
Because it's a trial program, not all of the subjects are available in each of the sort of the sessions that are new. So they're sort of mid-semester intakes. They tend to be just the big subjects, the subjects that are compulsory at the moment. But I assume if the trial is continued and it becomes I don't know if they take it from trial to pilot or just implement it in an ongoing way, then there would be a broader range of subjects. There's a website about the 6 session intake. Diane, if you could please have a look at that while we're chatting, a look for that and post it into the chat, that'd be lovely. Just information on which subjects are offered, when they are offered, and some of the mechanics of what would happen if you chose to take one of those mid-semester intakes. And here they are. So I missed a fair few of those, of course. But still a couple to come if you are interested. So here's some contacts. Arif, another guy that many of you might remember from previous presentations, and Neil, my compadre at IT Masters, who is basically the font of knowledge for eligibility and for credit queries. So I'll post this slide deck up on the Moodle page. And please accept my apologies for the slapdash nature of my covering Jason. I'm sure he would have done a far better job, but that's what it is. So we'll get to all your questions now, I suppose. Looks like there's heaps. Oh, no, that's chat, thankfully. Any questions about that?
I think I asked the ones about the masters already. I think there's 2 more here. So are you guys a part of Open Universities Australia?
Don't believe so.
Okay.
Chat.
How long before the chapter exam is up? I presume they mean the short 5 questions at the end of this module. So I'll devise some evil questions for you tomorrow and get Guy and Diane to post those up when they're available.
Beauty. All right. Well, perhaps we'll go back to your screen if that's okay, and then sign off.
Sure. Well, I don't have anything else to share.
Okay.
But I did just want to say, so for next week, we are getting to the so tonight was pretty technical, so sorry if I lost some people on that. But congratulations if you loved it, all the techie people out there. So next week, we're going to delve into actually designing a phishing simulation program. So essentially, if you wanted to educate employees or partners or whoever you need to deal with around phishing emails, what are the things you need to know to develop a successful phishing simulation program. So this is what I designed at our company at IAG, and we've had it in place over the past 12 months or so. And that's across multiple countries. So hopefully I can impart some of that interesting information to you. And I hope, I think that's all I have to say. And I hope you all have a good night. Guy?
Thank you. You as well. Have a good week, everyone. We'll talk to you next week.
Fabulous.
And thank you, Diane, as well, as always.
Thanks, Diane.